field, down the left sideline. Tommy, touchdown!
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Scripps Sports Big Sky Conference Preview Show as we take a look at league play which begins this week around the Big Sky Conference. Alongside Scott Breen, Ty Gregorek, Jay Cohn, I'm Kyle Hansen. We are your hosts for the show as we look at Big Sky play. And Ty, I want to pitch it to you to start it off. The league looks great to start. What stood out to you so far?
Well, I mean, we're 3 weeks in, and I think we're going to have an incredibly competitive Big Sky. I mean, you figure 4 teams are in the top 10. Depending on which poll you look at, you got 6 in one poll, 7 teams in the top 25, and you've got multiple Big Sky schools that have already beaten FBS schools. So I mean, I just think it's going to be a great year for the league and competitive, tough games, starting with this first weekend in Big Sky coming up.
You know, these non-conference slate, let's start there and look at what's been done so far. This past weekend we had the huge upset. Sac State beating Stanford. Andy Thompson beating his old boss in Troy Taylor. We have Idaho with an FBS win. We have Montana beating the reigning D2 champs. We have Montana State going toe-to-toe with the number 1 team in the FCS. Scott, as you've looked at it so far, what stood out to you about this non-conference slate? And I mean, the Big Sky's really held its own so far.
No question about it. And I think the fact that who these teams are playing, the Montana, and granted some of these games were scheduled years ago, like the Montana State, South Dakota State game was 5 or 6 years ago. So it's not like they woke up last summer and said, hey, let's schedule the national champs. But the fact that these guys are playing teams, Ferris State, that bring it, and they're tested early on, the majority of them, you know, this top half of the conference, anyway, is entertaining to me, and I think it's entertaining to the fan base, and I think I don't want to speak, I haven't coached in the league. You've been around it for 20 years almost as a coach. But I think from a coach's perspective, you like to see that oftentimes. Get tested. Am I right, Ty?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's.
Or would you rather run over somebody 91-6?
I mean, there's no. I think week 1,
yeah,
you'd always love to schedule a game that you felt pretty good about going in. But you know, college football, you don't get preseason games, right? So in the NFL, you get 1, 2, 3 games to see where some of those youngsters are, where you're free agents. Which college football anymore with the transfer portal, I mean, there's free agency going on. So I don't know. I think the first couple weeks it's hard because you've got these blowouts against bigger schools. You've got tight games against smaller schools. What do we really know about a lot of these teams yet? Other than I think we kind of have a good idea who is probably going to be really good, who's going to be middle of the pack, and then who's just not very good.
Right. And Jay, and you look at this too. I mean, let's talk about that Sac State-Stanford game, right? Sac State, a lot of questions coming in with Troy Taylor's departure to Stanford. Andy Thompson now taking over, a lot of guys back. They get that win. I mean, it adds excitement, especially seeing some of these non-conference games be competitive.
Absolutely. And I was so impressed when I got to interview Andy Thompson at the Spokane Big Sky weekend. I mean, he's not afraid at all, and he was very confident given their track record. But that's kind of a lose-lose for Stanford and Troy Taylor. I mean, the worst thing in the world, your old team coming back with the coach that probably knows you better than anybody. As like we were talking, there's really little upside for Stanford in that game. And I was, shocked that Sac State, goes across the bay. And, I can't imagine the Stanford faithful are that happy this morning at all.
Yeah.
But I think we have too many non-conference games. I want to see us play more conference foes. I don't like it when we have the unbalanced schedule where there's some teams that you don't get to play. But I know that the coaches, they want to see all their personnel and they use it to their advantage. But I thought the Bobcat South Dakota State game was one of the best college games I've seen, and I think that's what the fans want. I look back to the North Dakota State Grizz game back when Carson Wentz, that was probably the best college football game I think I've ever witnessed. And I think the fans want more of those games and see how you stack up, because those games, maybe they hurt your standing if you lose, or maybe they help if you win. But
I agree with what you're saying. Because I was in Missoula when we beat Carson Wentz, and that was Bob Stitt's first game. And like I was saying, you kind of like to work into that game. But I agree with what you said about the league. I think it's flat dumb that you don't see the same opponents or you don't get to play the whole conference. I just don't like it, especially because FCS football, there's always the challenges of budget and money. And next thing you know, you're flying all over the country to play some of these games, and you're going, why not just play the games that are local in the same region in your conference? So I don't know. It's you have to play non-conference games. As a coach and player, you'd probably like to kind of work into having to play a South Dakota State. But I mean, I said it on Coulter's show last week. The Missouri Valley, just in terms of, let's talk about the Dakotas. You got North Dakota State, South Dakota State, right there. I mean, they're close. Those would be intriguing non-conference, preseason, pre-Big Sky conference games that every fan would love to watch. And as you said,
pack the house.
Oh, no question. As you said, we saw that in Brookings, and it was, it was a interesting way to go out, and the replay and the catch and all that. It probably shouldn't have even come to that, but yeah, it was a great game, and I know their stadium was packed with almost 20,000. It looked like a great night. So.
And to play devil's advocate, I'm sure Ferris State saw the Grizzly game. What a great opportunity for some exposure and show the big boys that we can play too.
That was
and
a
I'm
good
sure,
team.
Yeah. I mean, their coach was, so respectful of Washington Grizzly, but said, the next time I come here, I want to be the head coach of Montana because I don't ever want to come here as a visiting coach.
And
again.
we were talking about it pregame. So I took my son Jax. We went and watched the Stetson game. And I mean, we were down on the field. I mean, when I'm looking down on all their offensive linemen, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a long day.
Yeah.
This, they traveled 4,000 miles. They had plane issues. Yep. Did they get paid a little money? Sure, but flying a whole football program, cross country is expensive too. So, but it was a beautiful day. And then to come home and watch that ball game in Missoula. This fly needs to die. All right.
What kind of cologne are you wearing today?
Only the good stuff. Work 60% of the time, all the time, boys. But no, I turned on that game and to listen to that coach post game, like, wow, that guy's just won 2 national championships in a row, and he's like, if I ever come back here, I hope it's as the head coach because this was incredible. And I was saying it in terms of FCS ball. And I've been all around the country coaching in these games. You're not going to find 2 better fan bases and 2 better game day experiences than right here in the Treasure State.
Absolutely. And then plus Ferris State putting on their 28-game road winning streak on the line in a game like that and then push the Grizzlies to the very edge. And to your point about the non-conference games playing the Dakota schools, wherever that may be, it also adds kind of a little bit of an interesting non-conference rivalry. Because look what MSU and South Dakota State have going right now. Met 3 times, twice in the semifinals, and now in a high-stakes non-conference game, which is now going to add excitement to a potential another rematch in the postseason. I think that's one of the best parts of it.
Also, win or lose a game like that, when it comes down the stretch and we're playoff seeding, right, it could buy you, even a close loss like that, could buy you bye in the first round, could buy you additional home games, playing a team like that instead of a smaller school that you just whip, So we'll see how that shakes out down the road.
Well, I think kind of the proof's in the pudding with the voters too, though. Montana State went on the road, lost. There was a lot of teams in the top 10 that won, and Montana State didn't move at all. They stayed number 3.
Hell, as they should have.
And I agree. I'm just saying there's a lot of people that you can say, well, woulda, coulda, shoulda, and we should have won the game. They didn't, but they didn't move anywhere. They're still the 3rd-ranked team in the country. And now we start conference play, and
they know how they stack up against the team that's
no question. I mean, I'm
rightly or wrongly ranked number 1.
I'm sure those coaches and players are kicking themselves that they had an opportunity to go take down the number 1 team in the country, and didn't do it. I mean, I'll never forget. I mean, I was with the Grizz a long time. I'll never forget coming in on a very, very cold, beautiful day here in Bozeman when they were ranked number 1 and taking them down. You go beat the number 1 team in the country.
Right.
That's fun. A lot of fun.
But then you have Portland State beating, who was it, North America, 91-0?
Yeah.
I mean, and that was the score going into the 4th quarter. So, hats off to Bruce Barnum for not calling the dogs off. But he said he got to play all 91 of his players. I guess 1 player per point.
I was about to say an honorable score.
I can't imagine watching that there was anyone left in that stadium by the end of that game. So
yeah, but you've got Portland State playing Oregon, who's a top 10 program.
I think I'd be what?
81-0, 81-6 or whatever it was, right. and then you play North. I mean, where's North American? Who's North? I mean, and then Lincoln. I mean,
right.
I don't know. So
it's a mishmash. We've seen the best of the best, and we've seen 91 of them.
Lincoln's who Cal Poly played, by the way.
Right.
And I'd never heard of them before.
Well, if we haven't, then what do you think the fan base in this area? They're like, who?
Right.
Who'd they play? I mean, when you're looking at the schedule, Portland State's coming here in a month or whatever it is, and they look at the schedule and go, where's that? So.
All right, speaking of schedule, let me ask you guys this question in terms of the Big Sky. You look at the rankings right now. Montana State 3rd in the nation in the stats poll, okay? Sac State 4th, Idaho 7th, Weber State 10th, Montana 13th, and UC Davis 15th. So that's half the conference ranked in the top 15 in the country. So now these guys get to go beat each other up, right? And what's that look like at the end of a season where it's kind of a nature of the beast? Yeah, an outstanding conference, but boy, if you finish with 3 losses in the conference or 4, voters still probably going to put you in at a decent playoff spot. Nature of the beast.
It could vary, right? Because, we saw this a couple of years ago with Eastern Washington and their high-powered offense when they had Eric Barrier, who they had a couple of losses and then ended up just being outside of the seeds. Right. This is back in 2021. Yeah. Ended up having to go on the road to Missoula in the second round, so they have to play the Grizz, who at the time you could have argued the Grizz and Eastern Washington were 2 top 5 programs in the country with James Madison, North Dakota State, but that was the struggle they did because they lost a close home game to Weber State. They had a couple of other close losses, and that affected them. So you never know. But you make a good point, Scott, because right now the respect is there. Will it be there at the end? And that's obviously going to come down to how teams look on game day.
I think the Big Sky, too, though, over time they've earned the right to start getting 4 or 5 teams in the postseason. I really do. I think what's going on in the Big Sky right now is very, let's go back 10, 12 years ago when the CAA kind of had a stranglehold. And then the Missouri Valley kind of, you're like, really? The 5th, 6th place team in the Missouri's going? But it's such a good conference. I mean, you could talk about the SEC. I mean, the SEC is a gauntlet of just like, now we get to play Florida, and then follow it up with Georgia.
Right.
And then, it's like, it's every week is a slugfest. And so I think the Big Sky has become that over time.
Right, and absolutely. And it's going to be a very exciting season. We're very excited. We have to go to a quick break. We'll be right back on the Big Sky Conference preview show coming up. Welcome back to the Big Sky Conference preview show, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the marquee games coming up in the first week of conference play. Scott, you'll be reporting sidelines from the Montana State-Weber State game in Ogden, Utah. It's going to be the 3rd time these 2 teams have met in the last 11 months. It's going to be a great one down in Utah.
It sure should be, and it's tough to beat. Ty pointed this out a couple weeks ago with us. It's tough to beat a team twice in the same season, and the Bobcats did that last year. Wild one in the regular season with the 4 safeties here, and then in the playoffs. So the Bobcats hosted both those games, won them both. Weber doesn't lose at home often, right? So it should set up to be a dandy. But even you look at the Weber State game, I mean, they just this week, were terrific. That was against the number 11 team in the nation in FBS, Utah. And that was a 10-7 game in the second quarter. Weber State was hanging right there. Weber State only managed 5 first downs in that game. If you tell me going in that you're only going to manage 5 first downs against the number 11 team in the nation, or 12 at the time, whatnot, you'd think the score would be 91-6. It wasn't. It was 31-7 final. So it should set up as a dandy. Plus, down in Ogden, they recently renovated their stadium, that east side. So they've got additional seating there and, more critically, additional bathrooms, from what I understand.
Right, pair of top 10 matchups in the Big Sky Conference with that one, and then Ty, Sac State, Idaho. I mean, what a game to kick off Big Sky Conference play between those 2 programs.
It's going to be incredible. I mean, I texted Andy Thompson after the game, just being like, I coached Andy my first year at Montana, and he's a good friend, and I just am so, I don't want to say condescending, but I'm so proud of him. I mean, because that's not easy. It's not easy to take over a program and then go play a Pac-12 school against your former boss and win. And he did. That being said, Jason Eck, look at the job he's done in less than 2 years. I mean, we were talking before the show about being at Quest there outside of Spokane, and those two walk around like they're wily old vets in that room. But you know what? They kind of are. Right. Andy's been in this league a long time. Jason Eck was here in Bozeman before going to SDSU, and he kind of felt like that was a good move, which it was. Helped him build South Dakota State into a national championship program. gets his shot at being a head coach, and I mean, he walks around with swagger and energy and juice, the same things that he's infused into that program. It's going to be an awesome.
I think he's changed the culture there at Idaho from the Petrino days.
I
For
mean,
sure.
Going back to the last segment, though, the conference is better with Idaho back in it.
Absolutely.
The conference is awesome with a good Idaho back in it, and that's what we're seeing. And Idaho's good. It's going to be a great game.
You got
Less
to
than
pick
2
for
years,
that?
yeah.
Sac State, Idaho.
It's
Idaho at home?
at Idaho,
Yeah.
right?
Their first home game
In
of
the
the year.
Kibbe Dome.
I can't bet against my guy Andy. I'm sorry.
I think until someone knocks Sac State off,
Yeah.
you're going to have to
it's
favor
in the
them there.
Kibbe though. I mean, the dome's different when you're used to playing outside. I mean, it's an intriguing week 1 matchup for those guys. Defensively, that might be the best team Idaho faces. I'm almost positive he told me he was going to call the defense, at least in his first year, because he's been the defensive coordinator. I think he's one of the best defensive coaches at this level. I really do, and that's not just because he's a friend. I think he's that good.
Yeah.
And I'll bet the Kibbe Dome will be packed. They might set a new record, or it's going to be like the old days for Idaho, because it's been a while since they've really been able to pack that and have such an intense game. Yep. I think, not to overhype it, but I think it's going to live up to its pregame billing. I would love to be a fly on the. We're going to be busy on Saturday, but I would love to be at that game.
This flies to be there. That's joining us right now.
I grew up in Spokane, and Vandal football for a long time. I mean, they ran the Big Sky for a long time.
Right.
And I know that fan base and that alumni base is going to come out and support them. I believe it.
And the Idaho Vandals is their first home game of the season. Then they've had 2 FBS teams and beat one, almost beat another, and then obviously the third one. Don't overlook it. Eastern Washington might be back a little bit, and they're taking on UC Davis. Going to be an awesome test. They took down a ranked Southeastern Louisiana a week ago. So Jay, I mean that's 3 games, and Davis is a future Grizz opponent. A couple of these other ones are. Same with the Bobcats. So what are you just looking out of that game?
Well, I think Eastern Washington is kind of. I don't know why people didn't think they were going to give Southeast Louisiana a run for their money, but it looks to me like Coach Best has them back on track, and the Inferno is a really hard place to win.
Yep.
And it's a whole new atmosphere over there, and to me, I think Eastern Washington, if you're overlooking them, that's a big mistake. But on the other hand, UC Davis, the Aggies, Dan Hawkins, they just put up points. They don't really care. So I don't know. That could be an offensive shootout there.
Right.
Neither team known really for their defense as of late, but again, that'll be a really good. It's a slugfest up and down the Big Sky lineup this year or this weekend. We've watched these teams square off against each other.
You talk about Dan Hawkins, some quick trivia. I know Ty knows the answer to this, but when Dan Hawkins, I think it was his first game as head coach down at Colorado, you know who went down there and beat him? Montana State. 2007.
Yep.
See, there it is. He remembers it like it was yesterday.
Yep.
So Dan Hawkins still hanging around, not at that upper level, but right here in the FCS, and has his team ranked 15th in the nation as of today.
The Aggies just missed out on the playoffs a year ago. Very easily could have been a
And
playoff
have a
team.
big chip on their shoulder
Yep.
against Montana because they felt they should have been in instead of the Grizzlies last week.
Absolutely.
Last year.
And they probably should have been. They got hot at the end of the year. Just a couple of losses early in the season hurt them, and they weren't quite able to get in the postseason. Now that we're 3 games into the season, we've seen some of these new rule changes also kind of affecting the game. Obviously, some of these are made in the hopes that you would speed the game up. Some of the flow has changed. We saw that when the Grizz played Ferris State this last weekend. So, Jay, I'll just pitch it back to you. What did you kind of notice from some of these for these first few games?
Well, we had a conference call this morning. What did they say? 15 less plays per game.
On average.
On average.
Yeah.
And so I think we heard the head coaches say they were concerned it was going to just be less plays, less opportunities to score. On the other hand, I like the flow of the game better. And the other, they're reviewing so many plays. I was at the Missoula game, the Grizzly game on Saturday, and the booth reviews totally disrupted the flow of that game. But as a fan, I want them to get it right. I just want them to do it quicker, please, quicker. But it's also seeing when we're here, we are talking about television from our perspective. The TV timeouts are way, way too long. Every time I looked down there, the guy was twirling the time thing. It was still 2.5 minutes, a minute and a half. The fans were getting restless for sure.
Yeah, TV
More
timeouts.
time to go get more beer.
Yeah, they'll slow the game down. I mean, that South Dakota State, Montana State game was cruising cruising along, and then the TV timeouts kick in, and then it starts dragging, and suddenly 3.5 hours later, you wrapped up. Looked like it was going to be about a 2-hour ball game. I mean, it's embellishing a little bit, but
how do you deal with that as a coach when
I think Chip Kelly, remember after week 1, he kind of came out and I hope they're selling all the ads that they were hoping to.
Right.
I know Coach Houck made a comment, I believe, on it too. I think if you're an offensive guy, you hate it. If you're a defensive guy, you kind of like it. I think like anything with change, it just takes a little time. I mean, if you recall going back to the spring when professional baseball implemented the new rules, you see pitchers and batters going, what are we doing? They adapted, they've adjusted. It's a little speedier game, and it, change isn't always easy, but people will adjust. It'll work itself out.
Yeah, speeding the game up doesn't hurt either, right? Because you can get into some of these college football games that, unlike the NFL, can drag. So it is a good idea to speed it up a little bit, but like you said, it's going to take time and adaptation, kind of like Major League Baseball did.
And the other wild card are injuries. The Grizzlies center got hurt on the second play of the game, so they just had a big 4-minute TV timeout after the kickoff. 2 plays later, they got this big timeout for the injury, so they take another big 4 minutes. So it was just this, it felt like the game couldn't quite get going, and it seemed like that was the case during the whole first half. It was just kind of sluggish, I guess. As a fan, you kind of you want to get into this, the flow of the game, and there just wasn't much flow in that game. To Ferris State's credit, frankly.
Right. Well, Ty, and you're a defensive guy. The clock change of the clock not stopping on first downs now. From your perspective, how would you think coaches would have been reacting to that? And
it's something you definitely got to coach up. I mean, because you're so used to the rules. I mean, this is all you know, and so all these guys are good coaches, and so they're spending spring or I don't remember when it was finally implemented, but you're coaching this stuff up in practice. Because it is different, you pay refs to come work some of your practices and scrimmage for that reason. No, the clock's running now, guys. I mean, you have to adjust and just coach it up.
Right, and everybody saw it coming, right? So it's not like you can't act surprised by its adaptation. Scott, have you noticed anything else with some of these rule changes, the game, the flow, anything like that?
Well, I think from a fan's perspective, like Jay said, when they cart this big clock out, and I'd compare it to a soccer clock when they change players, you've got the big and switch of the numbers. Well, now that clock's out there on the field in big lit up red, so the fans inside the stadium can now see how long they've got to wait, as opposed to just sitting around wondering when are you going to quit playing the Jeopardy theme song, da 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 da. So no, that's interesting, at least for the fans, from their perspective. I do like the first down, again, and that, for those who don't know, the clarification on that is that if the runner continues to stay in bounds on a first down, it used to stop the clock while they reset the chains. Now that's not what happens. The clock continues to run, the chain game's got to pick it up a little bit, and we move along. And that's on inbounds plays.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out with the rest of the year and how teams adapt, kind of like Ty was mentioning. And we'll be right back here on the Big Sky Conference Preview Show, and we'll take a look at the number 3 Montana State Bobcats and how they've done so far and what's next for them. Welcome back to the Big Sky Conference Preview Show, and now we're going to talk about the number 3 ranked Montana State Bobcats. Ty, you'll be doing color commentary again for Montana State this year. What stood out about them through their 2-1 record so far?
Well, it's kind of
they're really good.
They're pretty good. Yeah, they're going to do what they're going to do. I know there's a certain chunk of the fan base that would love to see a little more out of the throwing game, and they've been talking about how they're going to make those improvements and stuff. But you also can say, why fix it if it ain't broke?
Right.
I mean, they're still running the ball down people's throats, and they went to Brookings and fought tooth and nail, and came out with a loss. But I think the 2-quarterback system. I mean, I always say it, the old adage, if you got 2, you don't have 1. They've got 2. They got 2. They play 2. They've got different packages for both, and now we just gotta, or they just gotta, get some guys healthy, and it's not just Tom and Morale. They haven't had all their studs. I mean, up front they've had some guys dinged up. On the outside receiver wise, they've had some guys dinged up. So they haven't played a game with their full roster yet. And they actually just lost 1 or 2 this last weekend. So it's the same old deal. I mean, I think they finished second last year in FCS in Russian. You can't not be impressed with what they've done since Brent Vigen has taken over. Jeff kind of built up the program and did a great job building it up, and I was a part of that rebuild process. But I mean, the guy's been nothing but successful. I mean, truly, semifinal and national championship appearances. I mean, that's incredible. So I mean, it's just it'll be interesting. I know something that at least personally, because he always talks about it, playing complementary offense and defense. And I think last year, I mean, they were really, really good on offense. I think they were better than people give them credit for on defense. They just gave up a lot of explosive plays. I think I mentioned it on one of our calls. I think they gave up like 70 plays of over 20 yards, and so lots of big plays. And then in his first year, they were coming off kind of a generational type defense. I mean, when you got Troy Anderson and Daniel Hardy and all these dudes, they had some great players. So I don't know. I think it's a long season. They're 2-1. They've beaten the teams that they were supposed to. They probably should have beaten the team that could have gone either way. And they've got a dang good football team. That's for sure.
Kind of a running out of comedy, if you will, is Brent Vigen. When you mention his name, it's fastest 2 number of wins in the program, fastest 2 number of playoff wins. And he's just checking the boxes as he rolls along. So. Yeah, no question about his coaching ability. And in terms of play, MVP maybe to this point? Could it be the big guy, the 6'9" guy? Brendan Hall. Yeah, Brendan Hall, the place kicker, kickoff specialist. I think he's booted every kick out of the end zone this season. And he's a punt specialist. I've watched him punt against SDSU inside the 10-yard line multiple times. Yeah. I mean, this guy's a weapon, and if it comes down to special teams play, he's a good one to have on your side.
But I told you, I took my son Jax, who's 8. We went down on the field this last game against Stetson. And, sometimes with rosters, they can be a little inflated in terms of heights and weights and stuff. And I'm like, 6'9", come on, a 6'9" kicker? No. He's 6'9". I mean, he is tall, he is long, and he does have a big leg. I mean, I was telling you, the end zone, it's like or if he doesn't kick it through the uprights on the kickoff, So, no, I mean, they defensively, they lost Ty Okada, they lost Callahan O'Reilly, which were a couple of their bell cows, but they return a man amongst boys in Sebastian Valdez. Seabass is a player. I mean, I'm just telling you, I would have loved to have coached that guy. And then, the 2 inside linebackers, your buddy from Billings in Nolan Askelson, Danny Hughes, a player, and then their secondary. They've had a couple coverage breakdowns. That's going to happen. But overall, I feel like their secondary's improved. So I look at this team with health, and the stars got to align. You got to coach good, you got to play good, you got to stay healthy. But I do look at this team as a team that can potentially make a run.
How do you see this slugfest? Sorry, Kyle, but I mean, Weber State loves to run the ball. Yep. You got number 3 against number 10. This is going to be a battle of wills.
I mean, you couldn't have said it better, and you just look at the last 3 games. All right, so they played twice last year, as you said. It's tough to beat a team twice. You don't really play in college football. You don't see a team twice, let alone beat them twice. Well, in the last 3 games, going back 2 years ago, the scores have been 5 points, 6 points, and 7 points. So slugfest is exactly what it's going to be. I mean, their fronts are big. They're built up front. I think Weber State's got one of the best linebackers in the country. They're going to run the ball. Their running back right now is number 1 in the Big Sky in running the football. It will be a slugfest in Ogden at 6 p.m. No doubt about it.
Something I want to talk about with the Bobcats is last year's run to the semifinals. I don't want to say it was a surprise because they're a good team. They're coached very well. But they made a run that felt like they had kind of duplicated what they did the year prior going to the national championship, right? Like you mentioned, they lost a lot of dudes. So it felt like last year, even with the run, that they were kind of building to this year because all those guys were going to be back, right? You mentioned Okada, O'Reilly, they're all going to be gone, but all these guys are coming back, their entire fronts, those linebackers that you mentioned, Tommy and Sean Chambers. So it feels like this is kind of that year, but man, do they have to earn it looking at that schedule, at Weber, at Sac, at Idaho, at Montana. Yep. And if they do, I mean, you're probably looking at a top 2 seed going to the playoffs.
They've got the schedule this year that the Grizzlies had last year with all those tough games on the road.
Yeah, and they've proven that they can go on the road and play well. Right. I mean, they were an inch away from beating the number 1 team in the country. Brent Vigen has a very business-like approach as a head coach. He to me is a beautiful combination of Rob Ash and Jeff Choate. People got so used to Coach Choate and the way he did things, the way he talked, the way he brought that energy that they're like, well, who's this dude? I mean, and Brent Vigen is big. I mean, he is a big man, but he's a lot. He's just a different style of coach. And I think they've got the right guy in place. He's built himself a really nice staff. But you're right. I mean, it's going to take a lot. They are playing the best in the league, which we talked about earlier, at their places. But again, they go on the road. I travel with the team, just the way you do, Kyle. It is a business trip when they travel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, every time.
Coach Vigen said something this last week that was appealing to me, and I liked it. He was asked, I think, about the transfer portal and that sort of stuff, and we know coaches loathe it, the majority of them, right? It's a Wild West. Everybody's everywhere. But his approach to it is, he's like, well, we always tend to look at the situation like, why did that student athlete leave the school? Or why does he want to leave? Were there issues behind it? And it's a very thoughtful process for him, it seems like. And I like that, and I appreciate that, as opposed to just, oh, you're eligible, you want to come play? Yeah, suit up. Without,
I love how Coach Vigen is just straightforward and doesn't pull any punches when
At
you
all.
interview him on the sideline. He goes, we need to play better. We should have, he's not playing patsy or anything. He just tells it like it is, and I think the fans appreciate that.
It's going to be a...
I agree. No,
Yeah.
I agree. And again, he's so night and day different from what Coach Choate was that it just, again, going back to some of the new rule changes, it just takes a little time to adapt to the new guy. But if you can't adapt to winning a lot, then you got to get your head screwed on straight, because that's all the guy's done is win.
Right.
And there's some players that I didn't mention, but I nicknamed him the Alaskan Assassin. I think he's a very talented player in Derek Snell. They've got a lot of good players. They've recruited well. They coach well. Now the Stars got to align and stay healthy, or get some guys back and try to make a run, another run.
Another run, and it definitely happened, and they got to earn it. And it's going to be a great top 10 showdown between Montana State and Weber State this week in Ogden, Utah. And coming up next, we'll take a look at the Montana Grizzlies, currently ranked number 13 in the FCS. We'll talk about them coming up. Welcome back to the Big Sky Conference Preview Show. And next up, we'll talk about the number 13 ranked Montana Grizzlies. And Jay, I'll throw it to you. Last year, this time, Montana was 3-0 in non-conference play as they are now, but it was a lot more blowouts this most recent game against the reigning D2 champs in Ferris State. A little hairy there for the Grizz, and they got it pulled out in a night game, but what have you seen so far from Montana?
Well, first of all, the atmosphere Saturday night in Missoula was as electric as I've ever felt it, and you could feel it. The roars coming out of that stadium, record crowd, and Ferris State was for real. People can say, oh, the Grizzlies' offense was anemic, which it was, but their defense came to play and pulled that game out. So I would think the coaches say, hey, we were tested, we gutted it out, we found a way to win, which is exactly, can they do it this weekend against Northern Arizona, a team that has yet to win this year? Grizzly fans are hoping they can. I think the coach at NAU says, well, we got 8 more opportunities to show that this is we can still win. So this is not going to be easy. And Ty, you've played in the walk-up Sky Dome, and the altitude there, it always seems to be a factor. A lot of coaches don't like to talk about it, but playing at that altitude, Bobby Houck used to bring his team in 2 days early to kind of acclimate. There's other coaches that don't want to even think about that. They just show up as another game.
I mentioned it, in the pre-show. Montana State made a run to the semifinals, and it took every second of that 60-minute game last year in Flagstaff to beat that team.
Right.
And I've never played there. I've coached there a bunch, and I saw what it was like for the boys, and it's just, it's different. You're 7,000 feet up. You're up there. And it's just a dry, you get tired, you get winded, you got fluid. You preach it all week. But yeah, it's never been a real easy place to go play. It's just different. Domes are different, especially if you're used to playing outside. But yeah, 7,000 plus,
Absolutely.
it's a lot.
And the Grizz quarterback thing, I after watching the game Saturday, I expected McDowell to get more reps. He only had 2 or 3 opportunities. Now I heard today maybe he was nicked up a little bit. Sam Vidlak looked comfortable, but wasn't all that impressive. You were there.
Right.
So I think the Grizz faithful want to see a little more run and gun. All we got on Saturday was run up the middle, and Ferris State pretty much had that bottled up. The Grizzlies have a 2-headed running back. Is it going to be Nick Osmo? It's going to be Gilman. He had a big play in the end of the middle of the fourth quarter that kind of got the Grizz set up for their. But it's been a struggle. It's been an interesting non-conference schedule for them. They looked good at Utah Tech, but didn't look that good last weekend. but they found a way to win. I think that's
And they're
what
3-0.
They're
Right,
3-0, one of only two.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. They are 3-0, right?
Yeah.
Grizz expectations have always been through the ceiling, okay? And I had some friends that are diehards, alums, text me after that Ferris State game. Embarrassing. That's what they said. This is embarrassing.
They don't know much about
I was
football.
about to say.
Exactly. My question that posed to you, embarrassing, concerning for the Grizz with their start at this point, or just the status quo now where the playing fields are a little bit leveler with the transfer portal and that sort of stuff? And this was a two-time Division II champion that marched in here and tried to take care of business. Your take?
Yeah, who hadn't lost. Winning almost 30 games at home in a row is hard, let alone on the road.
Yes.
When Bobby Hauck says that team would be an upper half Big Sky team, that's not just coach speak. I watched the game. I was nothing but impressed. I mean, you guys were there. I watched it on TV, but I'm looking at that offensive line and some of their D-line and the way their linebackers were flowing and hitting. I'm like, this is a good FCS program.
Yeah,
I mean, I know it says D2, but you're back-to-back national champs at D2. I mean, I was impressed.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
easy to overreact as a fan
No, it's a
base,
good-
and
it's
when
a-
you do, you're ready to
no,
jump
that's
off
a good
the cliff,
football
you
team.
know. and
That's a
it-
good football team.
outstanding
I'll be shocked. I don't know how they came out of the game health-wise. I'll be shocked if they don't win a third. I was that impressed watching that football game. That's a well-coached, well-recruited, good football team.
And we were talking about it off camera. A lot of kids dropped down from Division I to go play at Ferris State, but they currently have 3 guys in the NFL, which is more than the Bobcats and the Grizz have. And if you look at some of the FCS landscape, they would also be at the tops of some of these other conferences. You think of the Pioneer League, you think of Ohio Valley, some of these. Like Ferris State is a legit football program, like you mentioned. I completely agree. To go back to what you're saying, that offensive side of the ball for the Grizzlies, the biggest question mark for them, I think, going forward, is fair to say, is the quarterback position. Because right now, dynamic is kind of the word people are looking for. They want to see things change up a little bit from a year ago, as opposed to that run game. Sam Vidlak, the thing people you have to remember about both him and Clifton McDowell, not many D1 starts between the two of them.
Right.
They've had multiple stops at schools. They're veteran players in experience of years. But this was their first Division I starts when they played Butler. So they're still trying to learn. And you saw Vidlak's comfort level get better. You see McDowell in the packages they run with him. He can do it. So when they figure out there, that's where I think things will start to iron out. Because defensively, they struggled in that first game. For the last 2 games, I think they've really sharpened up on defense. After losing, kind of like the Bobcats, a couple of dudes, and Patrick O'Connell, Justin Ford, Robbie Hauck. Those
and
aren't
a new
easy shoes to
coordinator.
fill.
I
Right.
mean, Kent Bear ran the show for a long time.
Right.
A veteran, wily old guy like Kent Bear and Coach Sachs on the D line. You lose a lot of experience. So I know they brought back Tim Hauck, who's one of the Tim knows ball. I promise you that. I coached with Tim back in the mid 2000s. They're going to be fine defensively. I promise you that. To your point, I know everybody wants to see bigger scores. Again, they're 3-0.
Right.
Yeah, they win.
That's all that
They're
matters.
winning.
Well, and they shuffled the deck as far as the offensive and defensive coordinators. Got the coaches, gave them new responsibilities. Brent Peace. I think the fans want to see the Boise State offense. Where's the Statue of Liberty play? You know, looked like kind of the same offense they were running last
Well, they
year.
also had Kellen Moore, who's
This
I think
is
the
true.
all-time
This is true.
passing
Right.
yards, I believe. I mean, they were loaded there for a while.
If we can talk about NAU just for a second, they also have 2 quarterbacks. They started the quarterback last weekend who everyone thought was going to be the guy, and all of a sudden they went to their freshman, I have his name here somewhere, Adam DeMonte, who went 22 of 31 for 247 yards, but both their quarterbacks threw 2 picks apiece, and they found themselves behind the 8 ball early against Utah Tech. So Chris
Losing
Ball,
Martinez was big for them.
Yeah, exactly.
I got to see that up close and
so
personal.
tell the viewers who Martinez is.
So he was a quarterback last year,
Right.
and I mean, again, I don't know if MSU will say they played their best game on defense, but that kid was very good. I'm not taking anything away from him, and he transferred to Baylor. So, I mean, obviously Baylor thought
Kind of speaks for
that,
itself,
that
right?
he could do some things too. So that kid was good. That was a big loss for Chris Ball and his team.
Yeah. Grizzlies 3-0 to start the year. NAU 0-3, but still interesting test with the Sky Dome, the elevation. It'll be interesting to see how Montana handles that test. And coming up next on the Big Sky Conference preview, we'll wrap up the show and look at some of the other standout teams in the league. Welcome back to the Big Sky Conference preview show, and we'll go ahead and look around the rest of the league as we wrap the show up. And Jay, let's talk about some of these other games coming up this week.
It's homecoming at Idaho State, Northern Colorado at Idaho State. I guess the cellar dwellers in the league will find out who can emerge. I remember last year they had a pretty competitive game against each other. Cody Hawkins, the Dan Hawkins' son.
Both new coaches.
Yeah, both new
both
coaches.
head coaches.
Yep. And so that's intriguing, and it's homecoming at Idaho State. We have Cal Poly at Portland State. Cal Poly with head coach Paul Wolf in his first Big Sky Conference head coaching job. He was the assistant.
No, he was at Eastern Washington.
Oh, that's right.
Before going to
Washington, then he was at Washington State, right?
And he was on Bo Baldwin's staff, so he's been at Cal Poly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He
Well,
was,
knows the
he
Big
was
Sky.
like the coach in waiting, it seemed like, when he was at.
Yeah.
So that is intriguing. Portland State coming off this 91-0 game that has everyone kind of shaking their heads. And Cal Poly 2-1, which I read is the first time they've been 2-1 since 2016. We remember the old Cal Poly team that ran the wing T or whatever and beat the Grizzlies in the playoffs. I always hated to watch Cal Poly come to town. And I think maybe they lost a little of their mojo, but they look to be on the way back. And then Eastern Washington at UC Davis. We'll find out how tough it is to play at UC Davis. The Grizzlies go down there in a couple of weeks. So I think that's a tough place to play just because the Aggies love to score points, and that's what they do.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Cal Poly's 2-1 start. They have the Heward kid down there. You know,
Right.
got a big transfer out of that. Seems like that's working as well. And you know, I want to shift back to some of these other teams that we touched on earlier in the show with Idaho and Sac State, who are not missing a beat. And you have Idaho. You have your Hayden Hatton, who is going to be one of these guys. You might be the next Cooper Kupp coming out of the Big Sky. You never know at this point.
Looks like it.
What do you got to say about like some of these standouts? Marshall Martin at Sac State. There's a lot of dudes on these teams. I mean, they're going to be tough to beat for the league.
Let's pump the brakes just a scooch on the next Cooper Kupp.
No, this is a hot take show, Ty.
Just having to coach against that young man.
Level-headed is not our game.
He's one of the best to ever be in the league. But no, he is. But again, going back to Jason Eck and just the energy and swagger he's brought to this program. When you guys were at Quest, you see the Idaho guys show up. They look like they were at the SEC media days, not the Big Sky. I mean, they were dudded up. They look good. Those guys are good players. I mean, there's a lot of good players, and you're seeing it on Sundays now because you look at these rosters. Of course, there's always the Alabama. Georgia's. They've had 32 guys get drafted in the last 2 years or something. But there's a lot of FCS kids on these NFL rosters, and it just takes. What we talked about Ty Okada. Ty Okada's on the practice team. Ty's not a big guy, but he plays the game the way that flies back.
Yeah. Just in time for the show close.
But he plays the game the right way, and I just think there's a lot of really talented. And again, with the transfer portal, the Big Sky's got a lot of good players in the league right now.
Yeah.
Well, he wants to talk about the Colorado Buffaloes because they are the talk of college football. So
Yeah,
you fell
Alma
asleep
mater?
before
I did.
the
I was
end
tired.
of the game.
It was late.
That was an
it's the
incredible
rivalry
game.
game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I told my wife, let me know the score in the morning. Coach Prime. I've said for months, up until 3 weeks ago, he's done everything he was hired to do.
already.
And that's bring in recruits and bring energy and swag to the program, and he's prime time. He's Neon Dion Prime. But now they're 3-0 and they're winning games. And you go to TCU, who's a well-established program by now, played for a national championship 10 months ago, 9 months ago, whenever it was. And then you beat a long-standing rival in Nebraska. That used to be the Thanksgiving game. You were telling me you're an old Nebraska fan.
Yeah.
We used to play that the day after Thanksgiving every year. And then you find a way to go 98 yards in less than 2 minutes and win a double overtime against an in-state rival. That give CSU credit.
Oh,
they
they
brought
played out
it.
of
They
their
brought
minds,
it.
yeah.
They came physical. They wanted to win that game. So now.
Yeah, now they play who? USC and Oregon in the next 2 games.
Oregon at Autzen Stadium and then USC at home.
We'll find out.
So when I said pump the brakes on the Cooper Kupp thing, let's just 60 minutes, big noon kickoff, game day. Everybody's been there.
Right.
All right. Now they might want to hone it back just a bit and worry more about football again, and because and then down 4 weeks from now, Oregon State, they're dang good, So yeah, but it's awesome as an alum. I'm on a thread with 20-some dudes. You couldn't be more excited because back in the '90s, they were number 7 or number 8 in most wins. There was a great program putting out Rashaan Salam and won a national championship and
Bill McCartney did,
and
Ryan Cheverini, the Cheverini brother.
yeah.
Old Q2 alum.
Darren was a very good player.
Right.
Ryan does media out in Chicago
Yes,
now,
he
so
does.
I played with both of them. But yeah, no, it's awesome. It's awesome to see as an alum. No
Is
question.
Dion there next year? Or has he already done too much and boom, he's gone?
Well,
There's already talk.
It's crazy. It's crazy what you see. Like Jeremy Bloom. You guys all remember Jeremy. Jeremy was a very good football player, but he made his name because he was also an Olympian / he had to deal with the NCAA because he couldn't receive sponsorship money. But he came out on social media and said, how do we keep this guy here financially? I'll start it off by donating $100,000. That's, I mean, he's like, who's with me type of thing. You know, who's with me to keep this guy? Because the 2 head coaches ago, and we don't need to go down this rabbit hole with Mel Tucker, but Mel Tucker kind of had the program going in the right direction. And then Michigan State paid him $6.5 million, and then eventually gave him $9 million, and I don't know how much more millions he'll be making at Michigan State. But people in Boulder want to keep Prime there. Now it's just a matter of can they?
Right.
Because I mean, there's so much energy and.
The closing drone shot of the fans rushing the field just had to be
Back-to-back
for Buffalo Nation.
yeah.
That's what they wanted to see. It was really a cool shot.
I mean,
Thank God for drones, right?
I told Coulter, on the show last week, I said, they rushed the field against Nebraska, an unranked Nebraska, who hasn't been very good in a while. They rushed the field against CSU, who's unranked and in the Mountain West. Who cares? They're having fun. They're having fun and winning games, you know. And,
Well, if you lose Dion, it might not be to another college football team or even NFL. You may lose him to the Colorado Rockies. He may go back and play a little baseball.
Right, yeah.
Right?
hey, you know, he's an interesting guy. I mean, on the outside in, if you're just a fan, you go, I mean, look at me, look at me, look at me. Ask his players. Yeah. They'll tell you he cares. He loves his guys, and they play for him.
There was mass exodus when he got there.
Well,
all the players that left.
Hey,
I mean, he weeded them out. That's an understatement.
But he told them that from the first meeting. Like, there's a good chance you ain't going to be back. I'm bringing my luggage, and it's Louis. You know, he brought the Louis and Shador and Hunter. I mean, he's got some dudes.
He does.
Dudes.
Yeah. Fellas, it was an absolute pleasure talking football with you guys. It's going to be an awesome season in the Big Sky Conference. Can't wait to see how things go for you guys with Montana State and hear your calls. And for us, the Grizzly season should be a lot of fun. So thank you guys for being here.
About time.
Let's play ball.
Let's play ball. Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching the Big Sky Conference preview show, and we'll see you next time.